Okay guys, welcome to Sim 303. This particular session is a little bit different than other sessions you go to where you're actually discussing products and stuff. The aim of this particular talk has got a couple of particular features in it. The first thing, making sure you can understand my accent. Okay? So, if at any stage during this talk I go too fast, just shout and I'll slow down, because what happens is I start talking about the subject, start getting excited, the speed starts going in my accent, and then you'll be lost. You'll think I'm speaking a completely different language to English. So how this particular talk, Conficker, Taming the Threat, came about was I actually come from the manageability field. I work with application virtualization and system center configuration manager. However, as jobs normally go, if you've done something successfully once, you tend to get called the expert in it. Okay? So what happened with me was I was working in a particular healthcare, with a particular healthcare customer. They got very badly hit with this worm to the stage where, I don't know if any of you have read Mark Russinovich's book, but there's actually parts of Mark's book that I've lived, that I've experienced firsthand. So this particular virus, it's probably one of the worst pieces of malware that I've ever seen. It has been called the worst malware in the past 5 years. However, what we'll see is the intelligence of whoever created this malware. Obviously, there's been a stronger intent than what we know so far, okay? The story with this worm is, as variants of the virus has went forward, different things have emerged, okay? Has anybody had experience firsthand of Conficker in their environment? Okay. How long did it take you to remediate? Just re-image the systems? Okay. A couple of days. You're in my team. So basically, to walk you through a real life experience, from horror to health in a hospital in Northern Ireland, how great teamwork helped. I'm not just talking about the cliche of great teamwork. I mean proper teamwork together, where these guys that I was working with really dedicated themselves to a cause, which was to bring the health service back on track. A small alert, a very small set of systems turned into a major crisis, okay? And those of you who've had experience with it know how fast that can happen. And of course, by chance, I ended up in the middle of a security crisis. So whenever I delivered this particular session at our internal event, which is Tech Ready, there's really not much difference in the session, okay? So what I give the Microsoft guys is exactly what I'm giving you. So identify the threat and deal with it. Create an action plan that works fast for remediation. Deal with the crisis and set the customer expectations. If you're a consultant, if you're an engineer, and if you're actually dealing with customers yourself, how you set those expectations. And the customers who have been infected, I'm not going to name all of the customers. I've only got permission from one particular customer to actually speak about it. But there was another 13 customers who were large enterprise customers. So under the hood of Conficker, we see that it's a worm that spreads across the network without human interaction. Okay? In January this year, there was a document released called Lessons Learned from the Conficker Working Group. Okay? If there's any resources as I go through this talk that you think is going to be useful to you, or you think that you could use, feel free to contact me. It's paul.devlin@microsoft.com. I'll give my business card out at the end of the session if you want any further information on the findings that I've made on the worm. So this, in a way, has been like my own little personal crusade to find out more about this particular malware. Because of the seriousness of the threat, obviously it's good to have the information and the tools to deal with it. Okay, As I say, it has been named the worst malware outbreak. There's a patch for this threat, and you will get some people who say they've patched, but they still got infected. Okay, that seems to me to be more of a false positive situation where the virus is entering code space, it's entering memory, but it's not completely executing the payload. Okay, so typically what I've seen happening is, say a customer has Semantic or Sophos, the antivirus is working away, the heuristics is working, it's analyzing, it's scanning, it's doing the real-time engine, and then the worm actually executes the payload, and straight away what happens then is the antivirus starts to alert. So I think that's part of what we're seeing there. The amount of customers that have not installed this patch would astound you. There's still a lot of them out there that think, patching is just a thing of the past, you don't need to do it. So what happened since we released the patch? We issued strong and clear guidance on how to avoid the infection. That KB article is still the KB article to go to. The great thing about this virus, if there's any positives to be made out of it, is that it did teach some people to put a patching process in place and keep it. Some customers never patched, now they patch after the Conficker outbreak. And there was a lot of press coverage about this threat, but still the infection rates were high. Now, one particular company, and I think it was wrongly so, they got a lot of, this is my personal opinion, F-Secure got a lot of heat because they released statistics of how many infections were actually out there. Some of them estimated at 15 million infections, computers. What it actually was they were registering the domains that Conficker was hitting. And as they were registering it, they were getting an idea of the number of computers. They were also getting an idea of the actual, not just the number, but the names of companies. So they knew who was getting infected, and when they put it on their blog, they got a lot of bad press about it. But it was really an effort. They wanted to research more exactly what was happening with the worm. So April the 1st became Judgment Day. It was like the internet's going to melt down. It was on CNN. It was on, over in Northern Ireland. I even seen it on the international news and thought to myself, well, is it really going to happen? Is April the 1st going to be doomsday? But what had actually happened was the virus didn't obviously melt the internet down, but it did morph, it did evolve. The virus actually did evolve and become more active, it had more abilities after that time period. So the virus likes to keep in touch. What I'll do here is I'll run through some of the features, and then I'll get to the main story of what exactly I seen and what I remediated. So this virus, as I say, will contact a lot of domains, 500 of a potential 50,000 domains a day to check for new instructions. If you go to some of these websites, a lot of them they're not contactable, they've been blacklisted. Some security vendors, as I say, registered the domains that was F-Secure. The vendors knew what companies were infected and the amount of machines within that company. What that actually says to me is, if there's companies out there that are still infected, what would happen if those infected machines or those group of infected companies were to be contacted by the remote hosts? What are the possibilities for this virus? So that's one question we've got to ponder. If machines are out there that are infected and maybe they don't know, I know of some particular companies that have healthcare providers, for example, that have remote work groups for vendors, and they're never patched, and they pose a big problem for not only updates but also any other app compat issues. So we issued a reward. I was asked earlier, why doesn't Microsoft increase that amount? I think what happened was Microsoft not only focused on Conficker, but they also focused on the affiliates around it, like Wolodac, Spyware Protect 2009. Mark Russinovich has asked this question a lot. How many of you get asked to fix computers for family and relatives that are completely covered with viruses. It's, you know, it's getting now where you see spyware protect, antivirus, super antivirus, and you get to see all these. And typically it's a GIF image that's running back and forward telling you you've got 900 viruses when in fact there's nothing on the machine. This is the thing that you get. You actually get bored of seeing it because you see it so much now. The best one I seen recently was ransomware, where the customer actually had to put their credit card details in if they wanted to get any further on their machine. I mean, even executing Explorer. And the only way to resolve that was obviously safe mode with networking, just reboot. So what usually happens when we get a strike, when we get an infection with a customer, this is the typical picture of the CIO. And for a t-shirt, can anybody tell me what the help desk calls would be flooding in about? Why would there be help desk calls flooding in? What would be the number one complaint with Conficker? Can anybody tell me? That's one. Not the exact one I'm looking for. Close. This is when the computer's infected and they're phoning in the help desk because they've got an issue. No. Huh? Anybody else? I'm going to give it to this guy because he said the word locks. What I was looking for was account lockouts. So basically, don't worry, I've got some more here as well. Basically, account lockouts. Account lockouts are very frequent. Is that your size? Is that your size? Is that your size? Okay, yeah. I need to look at it. So the CIO panics, that's another thing. So domain controllers will slowly respond because of the lockouts, the frequency. If you have a SCOM infrastructure, it'll go bananas. SCOM will just be completely going crazy because you're going to have RPC exploits, you're going to have bandwidth getting calculated for how many exploits can happen to each machine. You're going to have high traffic on port 445, web servers getting created on machines. So SCOM will go absolutely nuts. I've seen a 17-server infrastructure for SCOM with an RMS cluster all balanced out, and the amount of alerts that thing can handle is a lot. And this thing was going absolutely nuts because of this worm. Also, depending on the variant, security services will stop. Now, it depends. If it's Conficker B, Conficker B actually has the GOIP database packed into it, so it can actually go out and start looking for different hosts to hit. Every single one of the variants has a thing called HTTP pulldown for updating itself, so they'll all of the variants will update themselves by HTTP pulldown. The latest variant of Conficker, what it'll actually do is it'll use peer-to-peer functionality. So, and it has RSA encryption to check to make sure it's the latest version. So it'll go, am I the latest version? You know, am I the right one? Am I from the right authors? So there's a whole process that goes on place there. You'll get high email alerts from the antivirus server. We actually had a situation where a guy's inbox just totally collapsed because he couldn't take any more email alerts because of the virus. And any application that's network aware, here's the scary part. We had an application called Talkspace, right, which is for if a patient comes in and say the patient has just had an overdose, you want to look up and see what is the antidote to give them. That system was completely down because of the network saturation. So that was the type of calls that we were getting from the ER department. So this slide here is basically just put in to let you know why it is called Conficker. This was created by one of our antivirus researchers in MSRC. It gives you an idea of the name generation, the way it was created. Does everybody know what trafficconverter.biz is? Basically, it's a group of affiliates who create like adware pop-ups and banners and stuff like that, but they're not very friendly, like that. And the worm's also known as Download by some companies. Here's the variants that I've seen so far and that are in the documentation in all of the antivirus companies. So this slide here, what I want you to think of is whenever you download this slide or you take this slide, think of it as a tool pack, basically a toolkit, to basically use to get rid of the virus. If you follow the steps in this, you will eliminate it completely. You will get rid of it. So what I've done here is basically put in the history of the way the virus works, because it's you sort of need to know what way Conficker B works and what way Conficker C works. Conficker C actually used the peer-to-peer functionality and allowed spyware protect and WalletDAC to start coming down into the hosts. So we've got the social engineering trick. Probably the greatest part about this is this is why I keep on. This is the idea of why I like people going to Windows 7 now, because this doesn't give you very much information. Whereas you can see here, install or run a program, general options. Now you know your average user is going to look at that and go, click, and not even going to read it. Whereas us technically savvy people, obviously, we read the whole thing. I've seen admins click on install or run a program. So it's something that we don't expect to see. Even when you put your USB key in today or yesterday, I bet you didn't look to see any of the auto run options. It's just one of those things that you never know what could be on the machine. So this is a typical autorun.inf file, and here's Conficker's autorun.inf file. And this is buried within the autorun.inf. Garbage, binary junk. But see the command at the very end? It actually works. So what this was done, the reason this was put like this was basically to confuse antivirus researchers, to make them think, oh, we have a real cracker. How does this work? It was literally just junk. And it's unique to every file. So the infection strategy, let's say, for example, James is logged in. Okay, it's going to try James 123, 123 James. It's going to try a combination of all those names. It's going to then try from a password list. It's going to then reverse the passwords about. I've actually seen situations where people have been off, for example, on, say, maternity leave. So they're going to be off for like a good year. And this particular worm has actually been using their account to do damage around the place. We actually seen one particular woman logged in who hadn't been in the company for at least 6 months. And what it was doing was it was logged in because her password was the very secure password 01. So the password 01 obviously is the second password on the list. So straight away, bang, in it went. The other interesting thing is the first attack is going to be on the internal network. So it's going to start scanning internally first, and then it will go out to the public IPs, but it will not try to hit antivirus servers or IP ranges in America anyway. So it doesn't. It stays away from antivirus. It has, for example, Semantics American range, and Sophos' American range. Now, for some reason, they left a good portion of Europe's IP range out. I don't know why. Now, as you can see here, you've got the password guessing. I don't know why anybody would ever make their password foobar. That's crazy. And this is the exact service that gets modified. So what you'll notice is this particular service will get modified, and you'll have the random. What really bugged me about this virus was that random part, because we had at that particular time, we had access to software that could have caught that reg key and then run a script and remove it. But that randomization of that registry key was probably the most annoying part. Now, what you can do is, that randomization, you can use a tool that will tell you what it's going to be. So you can actually use a tool that will tell you what the file names Conficker are going to create is, using the computer's host name. And this is, I'm going to tell you later about exactly where you can get these tools. So you can actually look and find out what that random part's going to be. And it's not really any use, because you would have to do it for every computer. When the machine reboots, the hidden service will start up. The only thing that I've seen it with is sysinternals auto runs. Well, to be truthful, Gmer is a rootkit utility you can use as well. So these are the attack vectors, as I said earlier. That diagram, I think, that's from the Microsoft Malware Protection Center. It gives a good all-rounder of exactly why it hits and how it hits. And I've just put this in as a resource for you. It's the Facebook page for Microsoft Malware Protection Center. You can use that to keep an activity feed of what's going on, latest information and updates. Now, the best way to get infected is, if you're logged in as a domain administrator, account has a weak password, and you have an affected USB pen drive inserted, you'll almost guarantee Conficker spread. Now, we had a particular customer who had a very strong username of casualty and a very strong password of ambulance. Domain admin, and basically it was for internet use for ambulance men that came in and out of the hospital. And that was one particular area that got hit the worst. So, in a lot of times, it's just general common sense. But you know the old saying, common sense is not too common. I mean, whenever you go around customers now, you see that a lot of them are still not applying best practices that have been taught for years. So, how did the April the 1st panic start? Well, as you can see in the diagram there, whenever the code was analyzed, you'll see that you have the 2009 year, 4th month, 1st day. So that's actually how it was found that was going to be a date. But what that was more functionality came through Conficker C. That's all that happened that week. And it wasn't until April the 8th that Walladac was starting to be downloaded, which is another threat. So, interesting facts. Like I said earlier, the threat protected itself from takeover, and only the Conficker authors have the key to the digital signature. And here's what I was talking about with Walladac. Basically, this particular threat, Spyware Protect 2009, has anybody seen that? Spyware Protect 2009 is a real nightmare if you get it on a machine. If you got it on clients in an organization, you would probably be having to run a lot of tools through something like SCCM to remove it. So that's what happened in the April the 1st week. That week of April the 1st, these threats emerged as part of an updated functionality. And if you look at Conficker, if you go through, I've went through now with Conficker, probably every document that's been written on it. I've read through everything because I've known that I've been obviously talking to the public about it. And it seems like financial gain is the motive. It just looks like financial gain seems to be the motive. You can actually track activity via a website called Shadow Server. Has anybody heard of this site? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to my laptop here, and I'm going to try and give you a quick peek at what you can do. If I can get my mouse back. 1 second. I've got magnify on, and I don't need magnify. So basically, Shadow server is a site that you can track the actual usage or the actual activity of Conficker, where it's going. What I was able to do with that was I was able to actually track where Conficker was going in Ireland, and found that it was actually on its way down to one of the customers' routers. So I'll just show you it here. So what you do is you go to shadowserver.org, okay, and you go to the Conficker part, and right away what it'll do is it'll separate everything. It separates a breakdown by country, okay. And just as an example, can everybody see that okay? Yeah. I can zoom in with zoom in anyway. So let's just give you an example and show you Ireland. What this is actually showing is the unique IPs and the A and B unique IPs that are getting registered within these ISPs. So if Conficker's spreading around, say, Ireland, it'll tell you exactly whereabouts and on what nodes of routers that it's spreading on. What I was able to do with this was actually find out 6 weeks before a customer was hit that it was registering, Conficker was registering itself on their primary router, just basically at the edge of their network. Now, I say it took about 6 weeks for it actually to get in and start doing any damage, but there was no real way for us at Microsoft to tell the customer, like, to say to them, you know, we've seen on this website that your routers are being infected. You know, it was kind of a difficult situation, but we were able to make them double check their MS08067 status. So we said to them, look, we want you to, at the moment we've got a high alert status with MS08067, go and check, you know. So that was one good thing about it. Now, within that site, you've also got, if I just go to O2 Online, that's not a good example. Let's see. The information that I never was aware of the amount of information that's actually out there within all networks. So there's it there. See that? Department of Social and Family Affairs, Ireland. That's actually now it's all been taken off now. There used to actually be information on there about how many IPs were being registered. It's probably because we alerted them to it. So that is an example. You can go through within here. You can go through ISPs and see how many unique variants are being registered. Does that make sense? So just to jump on, what it'll do, what this virus will do as well, is it'll go to two well-known websites to calculate how many simultaneous remote connections that it can do. So it'll go to two particular search engines, calculate the bandwidth. Once it knows that, it then knows how fast it can hit you and how much bandwidth it can take. There's the domain generation code. And this is the sites that it checks the time via. So this is this is basically the presentation now that we're getting to, because that's the background information in Conficker. This is exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today. So the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust would probably be an excellent model of how IT maturity can begin and can progress well. What happened with these guys was 6 hospitals, all split, all different IT departments, all different IT people. They all merged into the one, and just as they were all merging into the one, Conficker was doing the rounds. Okay? And with this particular hospital, the second one, the Royal Hospital, it's the biggest out of all of them. It got hit the worst. It's also the most important out of all of them because it has the Children's Hospital and the intensive care unit there. So it's it's viewed on as the most important resource place. And this geographical layout, their network is lightning fast. They've got a brilliant network, but what comes with speed and a brilliant network? Very fast infection rates. So the second circle from the top, the Royal Victoria Hospital, and the next one, the Belfast City. So basically, I can't do it now. The way they're sitting together, them two just completely get riddled with the virus right away. What happened was, I walked in to the customer site just to visit a friend, because I used to work there. The guy says to me, I'm having some difficulty with some viruses. I've got about 4 or 5 on my Sophos console. I says, right, okay, let's deal with them, clean them up, right-click on them, scan them, get rid of it. Within about the next hour to 2 hours, it was just a sea of red. Just viruses the whole way down. So what we decided to do was, we'll have to have an action plan. So there was 2,000 workstations plus infected, about 2,560, I think the figure was. And it was all located in and around Children's Hospital, located in and around intensive care unit, and the ER department. So with the general medical wards also, all these departments were contacting us saying, what do we do? Now, what resources did we have? Well, I was there. I was just started with Microsoft. So I felt it was a bit strange being back in the customer site as a Microsoft employee when you used to work there. But all the guys were turning to me and saying, what do we do, Mr. Microsoft? And my first reaction was, I'm going to leave. No. So they did look at me as security because I used to work in McAfee. So they said, you're the one that knows about the viruses. I was like, that was years ago. So one of the first calls we got was the poison database in the ER department. Stopped working. And it was purely due to network saturation. The Sophos antivirus server then became infected. So we had alerts for the server itself. But the only good thing about it was the central installation directories, they stayed intact. So how did we tame the threat? How did we get the situation from a situation where the place was completely riddled with viruses to a situation of customer health? So we had, as I say, we had me on site, and we had a Microsoft consultant on site, and this poor guy had been working all day on a deployment project, and I said to him, you might be here late, because we've got a real situation on our hands here. The internal guys, the IT staff that worked there, they said, right, we're here however long you need us. We'll stay all night if you need us to stay here all night to get this resolved. And we opened the save A case with PSS Security. Now, opening that case was really, for me, a backup to have someone who is a specialist in security, because obviously when it becomes this critical to healthcare, you want to make sure you've got all the backing you can have. So I said, right, we'll open a save A case. Because the situation was a security event, it doesn't cost the customer. That's the way it works, because it's a vulnerability in the operating system. So once basically what we didn't sit down and write an action plan and say, right, A, B, C, here's what we're going to do. We all sat and just basically talked and said, right, what we'll do here is we'll sit down, we'll just take ownership, take roles. For example, you do this, you do this. So we've got 2 guys dedicated to cleaning servers. We brought in a network team and shut down port 445, just blocked it. Now, you may think that shutting that particular port down is going to cause serious file sharing issues. For some reason, whatever way the guys applied the ACLs on the switches. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever seen a Cisco guy going crazy on a switch and typing all these commands in? It makes you feel really stupid. And you're like, my God, this guy's brilliant, So this guy was just sitting going, boom, 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 playing all these. He was a Cisco certified internetworking expert. This is the type of guy you ask a question and he answers you before you finish asking him the question, you know. So they shut that down. That would be my first bit of advice if you ever come across one of these great infections. Shut that port down, get that quiet, because what happens is there's so much noise on the network, there's so much grinding from the virus. If you shut that down, it seems to give you a bit of a breathing space. So we assessed the number of infections. Like I said, I think it was around 2562, something around there. Has anybody ever used EventComb? It's a tool that I never became familiar with until Conficker came out. That blog link will give you exact instructions on what to do to find the malware, the IP addresses, to parse it into a CSV file. Can anybody tell me how EventComb works, what you're actually doing in EventComb to find that information? Exactly, and you're scanning for certain event IDs, yeah. So what we basically do is we see a number of account lockouts, like I say, and we're looking for those things. But it's not a completely reliable way. Whenever it comes to viruses, I always like to have a rule of three. I always like to have three main ways of getting something. The detection utility that we used was McAfee's free detection utility. At the time, I wanted something quick. I wanted something on the spot to find out what the real damage was. We scanned IP ranges, and they were just coming back Conficker B, Conficker C, Conficker B, Conficker C. It's just constantly coming back with different numbers. Then the worst thing possible happened. Active Directory stopped replicating, just ceased replicating. Whenever we put a group policy out, the only thing you could see was the GUID of the group policy. It was all damaged looking. So I'm not an Active Directory guy at all. So I just looked around and said, what are we going to do? So we had this guy, Kurt Fald, CSS engineer. He used to work in directory services and was a wizard in directory services. So what he was able to do was he was able to sit and fix replication. Now, he used a tool, I think it was called Sonar, a tool that he was putting stuff back and forward, but there was a lot of stuff going on. And the reason we were in contact with somebody in the States is because of the time difference. After 5 o'clock, PSS switches over to the States. So this guy was so calm, it was unbelievable. I mean, I can't do an American accent, but he was like, it's really a small number of infections. And I was like, there's 2,000 infections. He's like, that's chicken feed. You know, and I couldn't understand why he was so calm, but he had dealt with like maybe 16,000 infections on all sorts of situations. So that event put us back by about 2 hours. As I say, Kurt was very calm to the level of nearly falling asleep, like the sound guy. So basically, the next step was follow the mitigation steps in 962007. And then we started to become in control. This was the stage where I started to feel a little bit of control in the situation. If any of you have been involved in a Conficker outbreak, it is one of the most scariest situations, especially if it's a critical infrastructure. I remember one particular infection, and it was a security company, the type of security companies that go around with handcuffs. And they were absolutely devastated by the virus. And what we actually had to do was just to advise them to just pull network cables out. That's how bad it was. Because the situation they had was the virus actually started bringing more code down. What you'll notice when you get a virus or a really bad infection, sometimes you can start getting more code getting pulled down, which is a common effect nowadays. Then with disabled auto run, when you disable auto run, there is a time when you think it's disabled, but it might not be disabled. There's a detailed KB article for disabling auto run. I didn't include it here as a a bad thing. I should have included it. If you look up how to disable auto run properly, there's a detailed article on how to do it with group policy, because you can think you've disabled it, but you haven't actually disabled it. We made sure nobody was logging on using domain admin credentials. Was another thing we done. We had so many people logged on as a domain admin, it was nuts. So we had to stop that, because obviously when you're logged on as domain admin, and if it's XP, you don't know what elevations are going on there. At least with Windows 7 or Vista, you know that things are running in the lowest security context for that time. So one of the things I did see with Vista, with Conficker, was absolutely loads of UAC prompts. UAC prompts all over the place with INF files trying to load. So one other interesting thing is Ukrainian keyboard layouts do not get infected. If you have a Ukrainian keyboard, Conficker B will not infect your computer. It'll bypass it. The code, the payload will execute, and then it'll just go exit. It's we can't say anything, but it makes you think. What happened whenever? So with the Sophos server being in a bit of a situation, and the situation itself being so dire, what we decided to do was look at the SCCM server, because it was clean. The only part of the SCCM server that we had to clean was the file shares for the distribution points needed to be cleaned. Has anybody here, can I see a show of hands who's used SMS, SCCM? 1, 2, 2. Okay. SMS is a very good way of distributing software, distributing advertisements for updates, or, for example, running reports on clients. It's good client management software. If you've never looked at SCCM, I would suggest you look at it, because it is a fantastic product. I had never looked at it before I joined Microsoft, and then I got deep into training it. It's now one of my core skills. I would recommend you look at it, because it can get you out of some serious difficulties, because you can reach a broad range of machines quickly. And for admin management, it's the best thing. So what we done was, whenever we were speaking to PSS Security, they said, there's a tool that we've been using. It's not a Microsoft tool, so the usual standard disclaimer applies. We don't support it. But we did recommend that it was worked. I've used it 14 times now, and it's worked every single time. It's called Kaspersky Killer. It's a free removal tool, and it's specifically for Conficker. What we did was we said, right, let's get SCCM to push out the Kaspersky Killer tool and run on every single workstation, then apply the patch on the back of that, and then get all the machines to be rebooted. By doing that, we were then able to have a completely clean machine. Now, what we did first is there's a phrase called the early adopters, where you apply patches to a group of, say, 6 or 7 machines first. Make sure they're okay, make sure you haven't blew them up, and then distribute to a bigger group, and then distribute to the rest. So what we did was we said, right, there's 4 machines in the corner. Let's distribute this removal tool, the patch, and then reboot the machines, and let's see what happens. The results were brilliant. So we said, right, let's go, and let's get them out there. Now, this particular hospital used a product from 1E, a wake-up tool. So what we were able to do was we were able to wake up machines that were asleep, or were basically powered off. We were able to use Wake on LAN. We got the majority of the machines cleaned, and they say the effect was dramatic. Machines started to report back cleaned after we rebooted them. Some of them required multiple reboots. Has anybody used any of the sysinternals tools? Okay. I'm going to ask a question here for a t-shirt. What would you say of the sysinternals tools would be the most effective for troubleshooting malware? One of the most effective. Who said auto runs? Auto runs. Because with auto runs, you're seeing exactly what is starting up and what's being hooked into, for example, AppInit DLLs. AppInit DLLs is a very popular part of the registry for a virus to hook itself into. So what we did then was, as machines were being powered on by users that we couldn't reach, the tool would be run and the patch would be applied. So PS shutdown, what we did there was we got the CSV file of all clients in departments that were, let's just say, pretty badly infected. Now, what we couldn't do was, let's say, for example, in the ICU department, there's certain machines like blood gas analyzers and stuff that's connected, and you just cannot reboot them. These are machines, you know the machine that is in the corner that you don't reboot ever? You know the machine that's like 20 years, it's never been turned off? That's the type of machines that are sitting about there. So we couldn't do anything to them, we just had to leave them and have manual intervention. The type of machines that you're not even allowed to walk past, you have to tiptoe past them in case you knock everything off. And we did look like heroes. We were, at this stage, every single department had stopped calling us. All of the departments had stopped calling us at this stage. So basically now what I had was, the reason I use the term mantra for Conficker removal is one of the PSS security guys that works in the UK said, always remember the mantra, SVC host, which is the server service, and MS08067 and the Kaspersky killer tool. So that was a way then, a proven strategy for absolutely making sure you get rid of the virus. The cool thing was, it worked on all of the variants that I came in contact with. Okay? So what I'd say to you is, if you ever do come across this situation where, it's a process that can be run for not just Conficker, for other outbreaks as well. You can replace the Kaspersky killer tool with another tool that's being released for remove a particular threat. So let's say, for example, you had Walladac as a threat. You can get the Walladac removal tool, the patch that's needed for it, and you can run it as a 3-stage process. Since this has happened and since I've been using this, I've had other engineers contact me and say, I was using your deck last week in say the Ministry of Defence, and it worked. I'm like, yeah, I know it works. Like, but it worked really well. I'm almost shocked that the process worked so well. So services were all restored to the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust. 2.5 days it took to be completely cleaned. There was 4 machines that wouldn't. There was 4 machines that we couldn't clean. Now, I talked to you earlier about health vendors. For example, we had X-ray machines that we just could not touch, and they were machines that remained infected. We had to get the vendors to come in and them to deal with them. So the situation that the Belfast Trust found themselves in was they actually were sort of hijacked in a way by vendors saying, no, you can't patch that machine. That machine has to stay as it is, at this service pack level, at this patch level. And it really pains me to see it, because in terms of application compatibility or moving forward to Windows 7, the customer gets frustrated because they can't move on with this. So we had to get those dealt with manually by the vendors. So what I decided to do afterwards was we sat down and we said, let's measure user impact from this particular worm. You've got authentication slowed, which is going to impact the perception of IT, and then you have a reduction in the time to fix service desk calls. Messages, if you walk into a room and you see constant messages appearing on desktops about viruses, it's going to make you think, well, what are IT doing? So that's another example of how it impacts the perception of IT. Business impact, the cost of overtime, obviously, the guys are working until 3 and 4 in the morning. That was how that situation was. We were there at 3 and 4 in the morning trying to get that resolved. So obviously the cost of overtime to the hospital for those guys, the cost of third parties. We had to bring in guys to work the Cisco switches network team. We had to bring in advanced network skills. Impact to projects being put on hold, and reputation from business units like ICU, children's department. We had these departments constantly ringing us asking what could be happening. I'll give you an example. We had one particular department who contacted us to say that the vital signs software, the software that monitors the vital signs of a patient. Each patient, basically in intensive care, has software beside them. I think it's called, I can't remember the name of it, but the software sits on a computer beside them and it monitors Ward Watcher. That's the name of it. So Ward Watcher is software that monitors all these different signs and sits beside. That wasn't working. That was completely network saturation. Stopped it. So situations like that, as I said before, you read about in Zero Day, the book, but there's situations that really have existed and have happened. So what came about as a result of all these different customers that were being hit? For example, the Navy, Sheffield Hospital, Ministry of Defence, all these different companies were being hit. What came about was Microsoft and the other security vendors came together and decided to create the Conficker working group. This is a fantastic resource. I've got many links actually in the end of the deck for you to look at. Now, what it is it's not just one company driven. It's a collection of different companies all together. Now, when you go in here, you've got white papers, you've got scripts for running the clean on Nmap, or not running the clean, but the scan with Nmap. So you've got a lot of tools in there. Typical questions you get whenever an infection has been recovered. Who did this? Well, obviously, it didn't come from a good source. How do we trace the source? Well, to be honest, I never answer that question. I always tell them that you could say the very first infection. Usually that question is being asked for the reason of, we want to try and either eliminate the person who caused this or for whatever reason. But it usually doesn't be helpful to find out where it came from. At the end of the day, if it's resolved and, the customer's remediated, that's all that matters. Why didn't our antivirus catch this? Well, it did. That's how you know about it. It might not have performed as well as you thought, but the fact that you were alerted about it, there's been some customers who've had the threat for a couple of days and didn't know. We were fully patched. Why did we get infected? I've never seen this. There's always a hole somewhere. You always get the customer will say, we were fully patched. We deployed that. You run a report in SCCM or SMS or other inventory software, and they haven't. There's always that one or two. And how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? This is where you really need to get a plan of action together to make sure that you're constantly doing a patch. The question I often get asked from customers is, why doesn't SCCM, for example, automatically patch my environment? Well, if you go through the ITIL process, patch management is not meant to be an automated process. There has to be manual intervention. And after that, I had altogether 14 outbreaks. I got them all remediated using the process. Now, it normally takes me 3 days. Thankfully, I haven't been called with any infections. As I say, all the customers were large enterprise customers. Only one customer at Forefront, but the engines were ancient. They hadn't updated the engines, and whenever we did get Forefront and properly updated, it started to detect it. They also didn't have network inspection service turned on. That was another failure. What did I say? The other thing is this is, I suppose, only really pertinent with Microsoft internal things. One of the customers actually came up to me and just renewed their whole agreement, which is obviously not a decision taken lightly. Right after I remediated the problem. So the last recorded variant of Conficker was Conficker E. And the infection rates, a lot of ISPs have obviously blocked off a lot of the Conficker activity, but it is still out there. And the Conficker working group has been formed to keep monitoring the threat. So it is being monitored. There is a lot of stuff going on now to keep an eye and make sure that it's not as bad as it was. Has everybody seen this eye chart? If you have Conficker on a machine and you load the eye chart onto a machine, one of these squares will be broke, and depending on what square is broke that tells you what variant you have. For example, if F-Secure was broke, you would have Conficker A. If SecureWorks was broke, you'd have Conficker B. So it's an eye chart that you can use on machines. And that's the link there for the Conficker working group. So this is just a message here that I've put in to basically just add. I thought it was important to put this industry collaboration message in. So leave that in there for you. And then I put this in, and because I was at a Waxworks museum, and I thought it would be funny to put in the president anyway. I put that up earlier on, and some guy from Texas was like, just froze, and like you thought it was real. Okay, so really what I wanted to do today is just the session objectives is learn how to detect and remove Conficker and other malware effectively. So this is a process that you can use on other threats. It's not just Conficker. As I say, I come from the manageability space, so it is I suppose a unique way to think, to use SECM to actually remove a virus, but anything that's an automated distribution mechanism. Some people would be of the thought, well, turn all the machines off. I would say if you get a virus infection, the worst thing you want to do is make the machines unreachable. You want to be able to still contact them, because if you just turn them off and shut them all off the network, you're leaving yourself in a situation where you manually have to go out. So, like I say, I'm not a security expert. You don't need to be a security expert to remove the threat. Just a few simple steps. So there's the resources and the information in there. If you just need to go through it, there's lots of stuff in there. There's more than what you need. I know it's the end of Tech Ed, and you're probably all exhausted and looking forward to the party tonight. Has everybody had a good week? And this is the trustworthy computing links that have been put in. So all that leaves me to do is to thank you for coming today and to make sure you do your evals to win an Xbox. Is there any questions, any outstanding questions at all? Go ahead.
How do you think the CIO that made it wants to make money from it?
I think by basically the amount of traffic and generation of ads and stuff that's been caught from it, and also the actual spyware that's been created on home users' machines. And I think what might have happened, I'm just speculating here, I think what might have happened was it might have been an attempt to hijack a lot of companies together and to actually then come out with a message of saying, like, you have to give us this amount of money if you want your machines back. But I think it went wrong. That's my own speculation on it. But I think we will find out the exact nature of what's happening with it. I think it's just a matter of time. One of the things I noticed about viruses, we discussed this earlier in the meeting, or the first talk, was it always seemed to be a Friday that this particular virus came out. And one of the guys in the audience went, strange to say it was a Friday that we got hit. So, I don't know, maybe it's absolute rubbish, but I don't know, it turned out to be true for him as well, that it was the day. And when I worked in McAfee, I always noticed it to be holiday times or Christmas, or it was always those type of periods that viruses came out, So one more question for this last T-shirt. Who can tell me Who can tell me in the Belfast Trust what the most important one of the hospitals, what it was called? The second one down on the list. Who said Royal? I'll give it to you because you got one. Here you go. You are, sir. So, yep. Any other questions at all you can think of that I could make? Yeah.
How do you compare Windows Security Essentials to Persky?
Good question. So, the way I look at all antivirus software now, one of a view that I've got after being involved with McAfee for years and after doing so much work with client machines, it really the way I view antivirus software now is it can't just be its own, it can't just be by itself. It has to be part of a trio, or it has to be part of a ring of defense mechanisms. So I think you can have more aggressive scanners and more aggressive, so it depends on what you want. If you want heuristics, better heuristics, so better ability to detect, say, threats that aren't known yet, you might want to go with some product. If you want better detection, you might want to go with, say, Kaspersky, for example, which could be maybe too loud, and it's constantly going, to let you know there's a virus. So it all depends on what you want. If you want more engines and more scanners, Forefront is got more engines and more kind of detection abilities in it. So it all depends. It's a multi kind of tongued approach. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, the way I view it is like the spokes of a wheel, and if you have your center being your antivirus and your other parts surrounded by it to be, intact. It's all about, really, I'd say the most important part is patching, because vulnerabilities nowadays all come from the core of the OS out. So the way I look at it nowadays is get the core patched and then work your way out and get the applications patched. One of the things I'm looking at with a customer at the minute is System Center Updates Publisher, because they're even using hardware. There's even things like firmware vulnerabilities and stuff. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the Intel stuff where they were talking about being able to hack their way into the Intel management system. Basically, this is a stage where it's not the BIOS, it's another level of the BIOS. Like, it's kind of like a second BIOS. I forget the correct term. You use it in SCCM, out of band management. They talked about trying to find a way of attacking that. Now, that means, out of band management means you can control the machines at a BIOS level remotely. Imagine being able to intercept that. That's the type of threats they're talking about. So, it's really, I suppose, thinking about how do you patch everything, and then at the end of the day, if the antivirus is up to date. So I look at it more now. Whenever I'm at Mark's sessions, any of Mark Rasinovic's sessions, I would be I talk to Mark a lot back and forward about, the sysinternals toolset, because I think the sysinternals toolset's fantastic for looking through Windows. It's sort of like a set of tools being given to us to look through Windows that we never had before. And just looking at even some of the processes with sysinternals, being able to validate signatures and stuff like that is a great enhancement. That's how viruses are getting away nowadays. Viruses are coming up with the same names as legitimate processes, but they've got false signatures.
Do you have any experience with combo?
It's funny you should say that. I have a lot of experience with combo fix, actually. What you want to be careful with combo fix is, are you just wanting to know what I think of it?
Yeah, I've used them in the past. I've had good experiences and bad experiences.
I'll tell you a funny story about combo fix. We had a BMW salesman with a really bad laptop. I mean, infected awfully. And combo fix made me look like an absolute genius, because I run it And literally, after 20 minutes conversation, his laptop was fine. And he just took one look at me and he says, "You really know your stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, that's me, yeah." No, and I said to him, "No, it's the tool. It runs so many different tools." The one problem with Conficker is if you're the 1% of unlucky people who runs it and it wrecks your machine, because I've seen that happening, never run it on a server. Never. I had one guy that run, what do you call the tool? Gmer. It's a rootkit, anti-rootkit utility. And you only run it once, because if you run it a second time, you can get false positives. So this guy run it twice on a file server. He phoned me at 7 o'clock at night because the file server blue screened. He says, "What do you think I should do?" I says, "Go home, because there's not much you're going to do there." So Conficker can be a good tool, as long as you make sure you're getting it from a trusted source. It's good to get rid of the friends and family pain. Oh yeah. I mean, whenever you're up to your eyes in work and you've got 3 people in the family are all going, but I need mind fixing. Even if it's not malware, I'll run it anyway, just to speed the machine up, So take that. But that's good. Hijack This is another tool that if you run Hijack This and take the output and put it into hijackthis.de, it's actually a website that analyzes the content and spits out a report telling you exactly how good or bad your system is. So there's some pretty good tools out there. I like to keep an eye on the forums, like bleepingcomputer.com and all those types of forums. So we've had a couple of sessions actually at TechEd here. I haven't got the chance to go to all of them that have been pretty good, deep. Did you ever see any Laura Chappell's stuff? She's brilliant. She's very, very good. So I thought I'd just wrap up early because obviously any is catching flights tonight. No. So everybody's going to the party. Like I say, thanks very much, folks, and safe journey home.